Hidden in the dawn mist, rancher Elias Vance watched his quietest ranch hand, Jesse, stripped down by the river. What he saw next made his breath catch and a single, explosive question tear from his throat. What in God's name are you? This wasn't just a secret. It was a desperate gamble for survival in a world where a woman couldn't exist without protection. What drove her to live such a dangerous lie? If you have ever had your entire world turned upside down by a single truth, stay. This story is for you. It all began weeks earlier, on a sweltering afternoon when a silent figure rode onto the Vance homestead, bringing with them a past that refused to stay buried. The year 1878 clung to the vast, sun-baked plains of the Wyoming Territory like dust to a weathered boot. On these unforgiving lands sat the Vance homestead, a sprawling testament to grit and solitude, presided over by Elias Vance. At 39, Elias was a man forged from the same harsh elements that shaped his property, solid, unyielding, and scarred. His face, etched with lines that spoke of long days under a relentless sun and longer nights haunted by an unfillable void, rarely betrayed emotion. The loss of his wife years ago had not merely widowed him. It had walled him off, leaving him a fortress of silence and self-reliance. His home, a sturdy but stark two-story structure, echoed with the emptiness of rooms once filled with laughter, now holding only the ghosts of what was. Elias moved through his life like a shadow, each step a testament to the weight of his solitude. His sense of justice, honed by the raw, often brutal realities of the frontier, was a peculiar thing, absolute, unbending, and swift. He held no quarter for deceit or idleness, demanding the same unflinching dedication from his hands as he did from himself. A man could work hard, and if he did, Elias would see him right. But any hint of shirking, any whisper of dishonesty, and the man would find himself riding away with the sun at his back and no pay in his pocket. This fierce, almost primal code was his anchor, a way to impose order on a world that had once ripped his own apart. He trusted instinct more than words, and his instincts, though often suppressed by his rigid control, were rarely wrong. The rhythm of the ranch was a steady, predictable drumbeat, the lowing of cattle at dawn, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the creak of saddles. But that rhythm had been subtly, yet distinctly altered with the arrival of a new hand some weeks prior. A boy who called himself Jesse. Jesse was an enigma. He arrived on a weary horse, spoke few words, and simply began to work. He was efficient, strong, and surprisingly adept with horses and cattle, pulling his weight and then some. Yet, it was not his skill that drew Elias's eye, but his impenetrable mystery. Jesse never removed his wide-brimmed, dust-caked hat, even when the sun dipped below the horizon. His shirts, always long-sleeved and buttoned to the neck, seemed to cling to him like a second skin, concealing any hint of what lay beneath. He ate his meals apart from the other hands, a solitary figure hunched over his plate. And when night fell, while the other cowboys gathered around the communal fire for cards or stories, Jesse would retreat to a small, makeshift lean-to on the farthest edge of the bunkhouse, sleeping in isolation. Jed, a grizzled ranch hand whose weathered face was a roadmap of gossip and suspicion, was the first to voice his unease. Never seen a man keep to himself like that, Jed grumbled one evening, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. Something ain't right. Always wearing that hat. What's he hiding? Jed's words were laced with a resentment that stemmed from years of being Elias's most trusted, if fussiest, hand. Jesse's quiet competence, and Elias's own unusual, if subtle, attention to the new hand, stirred a bitter jealousy in the older man. He watched Jesse with narrowed, critical eyes, always ready to find fault. Elias, ever the stoic, never openly acknowledged Jed's musings, nor did he ask Jesse any direct questions. It wasn't his way, he observed, and the more he observed Jesse, the more a strange, unwelcome curiosity began to prickle beneath his rigid composure. There was something in the way Jesse moved, a certain grace, a subtle economy of motion that was unlike any man Elias had ever seen work a ranch. He found his gaze lingering on the figure in the wide hat and long sleeves. He'd catch himself watching Jesse curry a horse, the gentle yet firm strokes, the almost tender way Jesse spoke to the animal in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. Or he'd see Jesse mending a fence, the focused precision in every swing of the hammer. This attention, subtle yet undeniable, began to coil in Elias's gut. It was a discomfort that seeped into his bones, a feeling he hadn't known since the raw days of his grief. The breaking point came on a sweltering Tuesday. Frustration had been a persistent knot in Elias's gut all day. A stubborn calf, a broken axle on the supply wagon, and the constant, simmering unease about his silent ranch hand. Needing a reprieve, he rode toward the only place he found true solace, a secluded bend in the Sweetwater River. The water here ran clear and cold, carving its way through a narrow canyon hidden from prying eyes. It was his sanctuary, a place where the weight of his losses seemed to lighten, if only for an hour. He dismounted, tying his horse to a cottonwood, the familiar scent of damp earth filling his lungs. As he neared the water's edge, a flicker of movement caught his eye. His hand instinctively went to the Colt holstered at his hip. He moved stealthily, a predator approaching unaware prey, his instincts honed by years of living on the edge of civilization. He peered through a thicket of willows, his breath catching in his throat. There, in the cool, shallow water, was a figure. It was Jesse, but it was not the Jesse he knew. The wide-brimmed hat lay discarded on a smooth river stone, revealing a cascade of dark, wet hair that clung to shoulders that were undeniably, strikingly delicate. And then the shirt, that coarse, rough flannel he'd seen Jesse in every day, was slowly, deliberately shed, revealing smooth skin and the unmistakable curve of a woman's chest. Elias froze, a silent, disbelieving gasp caught in his lungs. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile the image before him with the lanky, unassuming ranch hand who'd arrived weeks ago. The strong jawline, the lean build, the way she moved, all of it suddenly made a terrifying, undeniable sense. He felt a surge of betrayal, a hot, bitter wave washing over him. This wasn't just a ranch hand hiding a secret. This was a woman, a deception, living under his roof, working beside his men, fooling him. The solitary peace he sought shattered into a million sharp pieces. He couldn't hold back the rage. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" His voice, raw and guttural, ripped through the quiet. The woman, Josephine Jo Hayes, though he did not yet know her name, startled, her head snapping up, her eyes wide with fear and a flicker of something he couldn't quite place, defiance. She scrambled, her movements quick and desperate, trying to cover herself with her arms, her face flushing crimson. She reached for her shirt, pulling it on with trembling hands, her wet hair plastered to her face. "Elias," she gasped, her eyes fixed on him, a mixture of shame and fury battling in their depths. He strode forward, each step fueled by a boiling anger. You're a woman. All this time a woman. What kind of game are you playing? Who are you really?" She met his gaze, her chin trembling but her eyes hardening. "It's no game, Elias. It's survival." Her voice rose, laced with a desperate edge. "What was I supposed to do? Ride onto your ranch as a woman looking for work? What would that have gotten me? Scorn? Danger? I needed a job. A place to hide. You lied to me." He roared, his fists clenched at his sides. "You took advantage of my trust, my ranch, my men. And what if I hadn't?" She shot back, stepping closer, her wet clothes clinging to her, her body shaking not from cold, but from sheer, unadulterated rage. "Would you have given me a chance, rancher? Or would you have seen a woman, alone and vulnerable, ripe for the taking like every other man in this damn territory? I had no choice." Her voice cracked, a raw, emotional plea underlying her fury. "Look at me, Elias. Look past your righteous anger. I did what I had to do to survive. Do you understand that?" The words hung in the air, piercing through his rage. He saw not just the lie, but the desperation, the fear that had driven her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the raw courage that had allowed her to live such a dangerous deception. And in that moment, his anger, hot and consuming, collided with a sudden, overwhelming surge of something else. A primal recognition of her strength. A devastating understanding of her vulnerability. This was the moment of decision. He could cast her out, upholding his rigid code against deceit, leaving her to the wolves of the world. Or he could listen to the other instinct, the one he had long suppressed, the one that recognized a kindred spirit, a fellow survivor. He made his choice. If you believe Elias made the right choice, a choice to see the person behind the lie, please like this video to spread that message of compassion. The morning after the truth had unraveled by the river, a fragile, unspoken truce hung in the air of the Vance homestead. Joe, she had told him her real name was Josephine, moved with a quiet dignity, the weight of her secret lifted, yet replaced by the heavier burden of vulnerability. Elias watched her, his gaze less guarded than before, a silent acknowledgement of the trust she had placed in him by telling him the reason for her flight. A possessive, dangerous man named Marcus Thorne, from whom she had escaped. But the world outside their shared secret was already stirring. It was Jed, the ranch's oldest hand, whose eyes, sharp with years of suspicion, first caught the subtle shift. He'd noticed the way Joe carried herself differently, the almost imperceptible softening in Elias's usually granite-hard demeanor when she was near. A few hushed words overheard, a fleeting glimpse of Joe emerging from the main house after dawn, and Jed's mind, fueled by jealousy, spun a narrative. "The new hand ain't no boy," he muttered to another cowhand while saddling horses. "And the boss, well, he's been mighty quiet about it." The whispers spread like wildfire through the dry prairie grass, from the bunkhouse to the stables, then carried by supply runs into the dusty main street of Redemption Creek. The rumors took root, twisting and morphing with each telling. "Elias Vance has a woman disguised as a hand," the first whisper claimed. Soon it became something more salacious, more damaging. "Elias Vance has a woman working his ranch, and they say she ain't just working." The implication of impropriety, of a man of Elias's standing engaging in such a deception, followed by an alleged affair, was a potent brew for a town starved of gossip. Joe felt the change immediately. The easy camaraderie of the bunkhouse evaporated. Laughter died when she approached. Eyes followed her, not with curiosity, but with a mixture of disdain and crude amusement. The rough, calloused hands that had once offered her a friendly jab on the shoulder now kept their distance. She was an outcast again, the familiar knot of fear tightening in her gut. She had escaped one cage only to find herself trapped in another, forged from suspicion and judgment. Elias, acutely aware of the shifting atmosphere, felt the pressure, too. He heard the hushed conversation cease when he entered a room, saw the averted gazes. His authority, usually unquestioned, was subtly undermined by the undercurrent of gossip. He tried to quell it. A stern look here, a pointed question there, but words were wind against a fire. He found himself caught between his fierce, new instinct to protect Joe and the deep-seated pride that bristled at the challenge to his reputation. The ranch, his sanctuary, felt tainted by the whispers. He saw the toll it was taking on Joe, the way she retreated back into herself, the haunted look returning to her eyes. The danger was no longer just the abstract threat of Marcus Thorne finding her. It was the immediate, suffocating pressure of the community around them. He knew, with a grim certainty, that this fragile peace could not hold. The whispers were a prelude, a gathering of storm clouds on the horizon. The tension, already stretched taut, snapped just after midday a week later. A cloud of dust, larger and more aggressive than any common rider, appeared on the horizon. It grew rapidly, resolving into a group of 5 riders, led by a man whose silhouette, even from a distance, exuded an aura of predatory confidence. Elias didn't need a spyglass to know who it was. Marcus Thorne. He had found her. Elias's blood ran cold. He had spent days preparing for this possibility, cleaning his weapons, planning lines of defense, but the reality of it was a punch to the gut. He saw Joe freeze by the corral, her face draining of all color. The fear she had been fighting so hard to keep at bay was now a physical presence, riding into her life on a black horse. The rumors in town must have reached Thorne, guiding him here. The gossip hadn't just been cruel, it had been a beacon. Elias felt a surge of protective rage so fierce it nearly blinded him. He had made a promise to her, a promise to keep her safe on his land, and he would be damned if he let this arrogant bully break it. The confrontation was no longer a possibility, it was an imminent, explosive reality. Marcus Thorne rode into the ranch yard as if he owned it, his black duster billowing behind him, a sneer already etched on his face. His eyes, cold and assessing, swept over the gathered ranch hands, then locked onto Joe, who stood frozen by the corral, her back ramrod straight, defying the fear that coiled within her. Thorn dismounted with a deliberate, almost theatrical grace, his hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered revolver. Well, his voice was a low growl that carried across the dusty yard. If it isn't my runaway bride. Didn't expect to find you playing dress-up, Josephine. And with Elias Vance, no less. His gaze flickered to Elias, a clear challenge in his eyes. I must say, this little charade of yours, dressing as a boy, it's quite the performance. Almost had me fooled. Elias stepped forward from the porch, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were like flint. She's under my protection, Thorn. You have no business here. His voice was low, steady, a dangerous calm before a storm. Thorn's sneer widened. Protection? Or possession, Vance? She's mine. Always has been. And what's mine, I take. He took a step towards Joe, his hand drifting from his gun to gesture dismissively at Elias. Come on, Joe. Time to come home. Joe flinched, not from fear of Thorn, but from the sudden, overwhelming realization that she was tired of running. Tired of being claimed, of being a possession. A fierce, desperate courage surged through her veins. This wasn't just about escaping Thorn, it was about reclaiming herself. Before Elias could react, before Thorn could take another step, Joe moved. It was a blur of motion, swift and decisive. Her hand, calloused from weeks of ranch work, went to the small Colt revolver she had kept concealed beneath her worn shirt, a weapon she had carried since the day she fled. The shot cracked through the heavy air, sharp and deafening. Marcus Thorn staggered back, a look of pure shock and disbelief contorting his face as he clutched his left arm, blood blossoming on his duster. The bullet had found its mark, not fatal, but a clear, painful assertion of her will. Silence descended upon the yard, absolute and profound, broken only by Thorn's pained gasp. The ranch hands stood frozen, their mouths agape. Elias, his own hand hovering above his weapon, stared at Joe, then at Thorn, a flicker of something akin to awe in his rigid features. He had been prepared to fight for her, to kill for her. He had never imagined she would be the one to fire the first shot. The reversal was stunning. The hunted had become the hunter. The runaway bride had just made a declaration of war. Thorn, clutching his bleeding arm, his face a mask of fury and humiliation, stared at her. You shot me, he stammered, as if unable to comprehend the reality of it. Yes, Joe said, her voice shaking but clear, the gun still steady in her hand. And if you ever come near me again, my aim will be better. Elias stepped forward then, positioning himself between Joe and Thorn's men, who were now reaching for their own weapons. Get him out of here. Elias's voice was a low command, cutting through the stunned silence. Take him to the sheriff in Redemption Creek. Tell him Mr. Thorn had an accident. He won't be bothering anyone again. He didn't need to raise his rifle. The sight of Joe, fierce and armed, and Elias, a silent, immovable wall of a man, was enough. Thorn's men, their bravado shattered by the unexpected turn of events, hesitated. They had come for an easy retrieval, not a gunfight with a woman who shot first and a rancher who looked ready to finish the job. Go, Elias repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Now, they went. They hauled their wounded, sputtering boss onto his horse and rode out of the ranch yard in a cloud of dust and humiliation. As they disappeared, Elias turned to Joe. He walked towards her, his gaze unwavering. He reached for her hand, the one holding the still smoking pistol, and his fingers closed around hers, firm and reassuring. You're not alone anymore, Joe, he said, his voice carrying the weight of an unbreakable promise. Not anymore. The words were not just for her, but for every man standing witness, a declaration that the Vance homestead and the woman on it were under his unyielding protection. If you were one of the ranch hands witnessing this, what would have changed your mind about Joe? Share your thoughts in the comments. The dust settled, not just in the wake of Marcus Thorn's hasty retreat, but across the Vance homestead itself. A strange quiet, heavy with relief and the promise of change, descended upon the familiar landscape. The tension that had coiled around every post and beam for weeks began to unravel, leaving behind a fragile sense of peace. The days immediately following Thorn's departure saw a clear division among the ranch hands. Jed, true to his nature, grumbled about the unnaturalness of a woman working alongside them, especially one who had been so deceptive and was now proven to be violent. His resentment, fueled by a deep-seated conservatism and perhaps a bruised ego, festered until one crisp morning, he packed his meager belongings and rode out without a word of farewell. A couple of younger, less loyal hands followed suit, seeking easier pastures. But the majority stayed. These were the men who had witnessed Joe's unwavering work ethic, her quiet determination, and finally, her fierce courage. Their loyalty to Elias, and now a burgeoning respect for Joe, solidified. The ranch, though slightly diminished in numbers, felt stronger, purer, stripped of its dissenting elements. Joe, no longer bound by the heavy wool shirts and wide-brimmed hats of her disguise, emerged. The transformation was gradual at first, a shedding of layers. The first day, she appeared in a simple, practical dress borrowed from a trunk of Elias's late wife's belongings. Her hair, previously tucked away, was now often braided, catching the sunlight like spun copper. Her movements, once deliberately stiff and masculine, softened, revealing a natural grace. The fear that had shadowed her eyes for so long began to recede, replaced by a quiet confidence. She no longer had to guard every word, every gesture. She was simply Josephine Jo Hayes, a woman strong and capable, her hands still calloused from work, her spirit fiercely independent. The ranch hands, after an initial awkwardness, settled into a new rhythm, addressing her by her name, their respect evident in their deferential nods and the way they instinctively offered help with heavier tasks, not because she was weak, but because she was no longer pretending. Elias watched her, his gaze less guarded, a newfound tenderness in his eyes. Their relationship deepened not through grand declarations, but in the shared silences, the knowing glances across the dusty corrals. He found himself anticipating her presence, the low hum of her voice, the way her laughter, now unburdened, could lift the heavy air of the ranch. Mornings began with the shared warmth of coffee on the porch before the sun had fully chased the chill from the air. Evenings brought them together again, often by the fire in the main house, Elias reading, Joe mending, the silence between them no longer empty, but full. One evening, as twilight bled into the vast prairie sky, Elias found her on the porch, watching the last vestiges of daylight fade. "You know," he began, his voice a low rumble, breaking the comfortable quiet. "After my wife died, I thought that part of me was gone too, buried with her. I built walls around myself. Figured it was safer that way." Joe remained silent, her gaze unwavering, offering him the space he needed to speak. He finally turned, his eyes meeting hers, holding a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "But then you came, a boy, or so I thought, and you stirred things up, Joe. Made me feel things I thought I'd forgotten how to feel." He pushed off the post, taking a step closer. "When I look at this ranch now, I don't just see the ghost of what was. I see a future, and I see you in it." His voice was rough with emotion, raw and honest. Joe looked up at him, her heart swelling with a warmth she hadn't dared to imagine. For so long her life had been defined by fear, by running, by hiding. Now, standing before her was a man who saw her, truly saw her, and offered not just safety, but a foundation upon which to build a home. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face, lighting up her eyes, erasing the last lingering shadows of her past. It was the smile of a woman who had found her place. This was her final choice, her moral challenge accepted. She would no longer be a fugitive. She would be a partner. She would build a life here, in this place that had become her sanctuary, with the man who had become her anchor. The ranch, once a refuge, was now a home. Life on the Vance homestead settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. The invisible walls Elias had built around his heart crumbled, brick by silent brick. He found himself rediscovering the simple joys of a shared life, the comfortable quiet of an evening spent reading by the fire with Joe mending nearby, the easy banter over morning coffee, the shared satisfaction of a hard day's work. The house, once a hollow monument to his grief, began to feel like a home again. It was no longer filled with the ghosts of the past, but with the vibrant, hopeful presence of a future he had never expected. Joe, in turn, found a freedom she had never known. She was no longer a boy in hiding or a possession to be claimed. She was a respected partner. Her natural intelligence and keen eye for managing the ranch's resources became indispensable. Elias, recognizing her skill, began to defer to her judgment on everything from selling cattle to buying new equipment. They were equals, their strengths complementing each other, their partnership a quiet, powerful force that resonated throughout the homestead. The community of Redemption Creek, ever watchful, slowly began to change its tune. Marcus Thorne, humiliated and wounded, had left the territory, his power broken not by a rival's gun, but by a woman's defiance. His absence left a vacuum that was filled not with a new bully, but with a grudging respect for the Vance homestead. The story of Joe's stand became a local legend, a cautionary tale for men who underestimated the strength of a determined woman. The whispers and snickers that had once followed Joe were replaced by respectful nods. When she and Elias rode into town together in the supply wagon, they were no longer a source of scandalous gossip, but a symbol of a new kind of frontier strength, a partnership built on mutual respect and unwavering loyalty. The boundaries of their two separate, lonely worlds had been broken down, and a new, shared world had been built in their place. Their love, which had been forged in the crucible of deception and violence, deepened and softened in the gentle light of their shared days. It was a love expressed not in grand, poetic declarations, but in small, steady acts of care. It was in the way he would bring her a cup of coffee just as she was waking, the way she would have a hot meal waiting for him when he came in from the fields, the way they could communicate a whole conversation with a single look across a crowded corral. It was a practical, grounded love, rooted in the soil of the ranch they both tended. One evening, a year after Thorne's departure, they sat on the porch, watching a spectacular sunset paint the Wyoming sky in hues of violet and gold. The air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of rain. Elias was leaning against a post, his gaze fixed on the horizon, a rare softness in his usually stern features. Joe sat on the top step, her hands resting in her lap, watching the last vestiges of daylight fade. "I spent so long," Elias began, his voice a low rumble, breaking the comfortable quiet, "carrying my grief for my wife like a heavy stone. I thought it was a part of me, a part of who I had to be." He finally turned his head, his eyes meeting hers, holding a deep, vulnerable sincerity. "But you helped me set it down. Not forget her, never that. But to heal, to breathe again." He pushed off the post and walked over to her, his shadow falling gently over her. He knelt before her, just as he had on the day of his return from the river, taking her calloused hands in his. "Josephine Hayes," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You came to my ranch looking for a hiding place, but you gave me a home." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple gold band, his late wife's wedding ring. "I know this is forward," he said, his gaze unwavering. "But I have to ask, will you marry me, Joe? Will you build a life with me, right here?" Joe looked down at the man kneeling before her, the man who had seen through her disguise to the truth of who she was, the man who had offered her protection and then, impossibly, his he. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of profound, overwhelming joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Elias, I will. If you believe that even the deepest wounds can heal and that everyone deserves a second chance at happiness, please share this video." Years passed, turning the dust of memory into the solid earth of a shared life. The Vance homestead thrived, a testament to the partnership at its heart. The stark, lonely house Elias had once inhabited became a home, its walls echoing with the laughter of their two children, a boy with his father's steady blue eyes and a girl with her mother's fiery spirit. The ranch grew, not just in cattle and land, but in reputation. It was known throughout the Wyoming territory as a place of integrity, a place where a person's worth was measured by their character, not by their gender or their past. Elias, no longer the walled-off widower, became a quiet pillar of the community, a man whose advice was sought and whose word was trusted. Joe, the fugitive who had once hidden her identity to survive, became a respected matriarch, known for her sharp mind, her generous heart, and the unwavering courage that still burned in her eyes. The story of their beginning, the deception, the revelation by the river, the standoff in the yard, became a cherished piece of family lore, a tale told to their children on long winter nights. One crisp autumn evening, when the cottonwoods along the Sweetwater River had turned to gold, Elias and Joe sat on their porch, watching their children play tag in the fading light. Elias, his hair now streaked with silver, reached over and took his wife's hand. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked quietly. "Marcus Thorne." She knew instantly who he meant. "Sometimes," she admitted, her gaze distant for a moment. "I think about the fear. But mostly, I think about the woman who pulled that trigger. I barely recognize her now." "I recognize her," Elias said, his thumb tracing the lines on her hand. "She's the same woman who runs this ranch, who raised our children, who taught a stubborn, broken man how to live again. She just learned she didn't need to be afraid anymore." A comfortable, knowing silence settled between them, a testament to a love that had been tested by fire and had emerged stronger than steel. Their life was the answer to the questions their past had posed. This story, etched into the soul of the frontier, leaves us with a profound and lingering question. Where does a person's true identity lie? Is it in the roles the world assigns us, or in the one we have the courage to claim for ourselves? Joe Hayes was a fugitive, a boy, a victim, a possession, but her true self was a warrior, a partner, a mother, a leader. Elias Vance was a widower, a recluse, a man defined by his grief. But his true self was a protector, a partner, a father, a man of quiet, unshakable honor. Their story teaches us that the masks we wear to survive do not have to become our faces. It reminds us that our past, no matter how scarred, does not have to be our future. And it proves that the most profound love is not about finding a perfect person, but about seeing the imperfect truth of someone and choosing to stand with them, not just in spite of their scars, but because of them. What would you do if you were in that position? Would you have the courage to look past the deception to see the desperation? Would you risk your own carefully constructed peace to offer sanctuary to another? The choices we make when confronted with an uncomfortable truth are the ones that forge the steel of our character. Not all who are lost are looking for a savior. Sometimes, they are just looking for a witness, someone to see them for who they truly are, so they can finally begin the journey home to themselves. If this story of truth, courage, and a love that healed all wounds resonated with you, please subscribe to Mr. Storytelling. There are always more stories of the untamed heart waiting to be told.